Greetings and welcome to our podcast series, Soul on Fire, Narratives that Inspire, a collaborative between the Program for Faculty Development and the McMaster Institute for Innovation and Excellence in Teaching and Learning. This podcast series aims to showcase the narratives of exemplary McMaster faculty educators in order to inspire our academic community to recognize their own passion and academic potential. I'm Ann Wong, Assistant Dean, Program for Faculty Development, and today we'll be in conversation with Dr. Catherine Anderson, Assistant Professor, Teaching Track in the Department of Linguistics and Languages at McMaster University. Catherine, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
I wonder if you could start by telling me a little bit about what brought you back to McMaster University after your PhD, and perhaps talk a little bit about the work that you're doing here.
It was really exciting to live in the United States for grad school, but through that time I always knew I wanted to come back to Canada for my career. So when I got the job at McMaster, it was just a 2-year contract. It was a short-term contract, but my partner and I decided to take a risk and buy a house in the East End of Hamilton. So in retrospect, that decision to buy a house had a profound influence on my career because I had invested in Hamilton, and so it meant that I invested in McMaster as well. So as soon as I started the job, I started creating and developing new classes, I started joining committees, I started to work as if I was here for the long term.
Right. So even though you knew you only had a 2-year contract, you went ahead and bought that house anyway. And it was your first house, I'm assuming?
It was, yeah. It was a little house out near Gage Park. We learned to be homeowners, but we put down roots in the community. And at the time I didn't know it, but it did have that effect of me putting down roots at McMaster as well. So I feel like that was a stroke of luck. We didn't know the consequence that decision would have, but it meant that that this short-term contract turned into another contract, and then when the university created this stream for teaching professors, I said, that's the career I want. And I consider myself really lucky to be in this position now. I've earned permanence as a teaching professor, and throughout those years, I realized that I was a lot less interested in advancing knowledge in the narrow field of psycholinguistics that I had trained in, and a lot more interested in the practical side of what works in the classroom, what can I do to help students develop their knowledge. So now I get to do that all the time. It's great.
So maybe you can tell me a little bit about the work. I don't have a background in linguistics and languages, and so maybe you can tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing here at the university.
My regular teaching includes the 2 big intro classes in linguistics. So that's Intro to Linguistics 1 and 2. And those classes are something that most students don't have much exposure to in high school. They don't know what linguistics is. A lot of students take it just because it sounds sort of curious and maybe interesting. And the neat thing about linguistics is it's looking at the innate, unconscious knowledge that we all have in our minds about the languages that we speak and making that overt. So becoming explicitly conscious of this implicit unconscious knowledge that we have about how our mental grammar works, how our languages organize sounds to form words and organize words to form sentences. We do it rapidly and effortlessly all day, every day. And for the most part, we're not conscious of how we do it. So it's a fun discovery for a lot of students to realize that they know a lot of linguistics, they just don't know they know it.
So do you find the students come back to you and say that they become much more aware about how they say things or how they pronounce things or what they say?
Yeah, that happens for sure. They'll start noticing examples of phenomena we talk about in class. Early on in the course, we talk about phonetics and how we use our mouths to produce speech sounds. And so then they all finally get very self-conscious because to do their homework, they have to make lots of funny noises and go, buh, 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 zzz, and their roommates laugh at them while they're making noises to do their linguistics homework. But yeah, they start noticing patterns. They start noticing the way people behave with language. And that's a lot of fun because the data are everywhere, right? You don't have to go into a lab to observe language data. It's all around you. You can observe it all the time.
That's the neat thing of it, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
That in day-to-day life, students can see it enacted and actually think about it or practice it or conceptualize it.
Yeah, exactly. One of the upper year classes that I teach is child language acquisition. So it looks at how kids, from even before they're born until about the time they start school, how they naturally acquire the language that they're exposed to without being taught it. And for that class, I bring in a lot of examples of things that my kids did when they were little. And so it's a lot of fun to teach. And the students always enjoy seeing those real life examples, videos and pictures of my kids. And then I ask them if they know any kids, if they have nieces and nephews, or if they have kids themselves, to share examples. And that's another fun data set that's, you can learn a lot from these everyday things that happen.
And given that we have such a wide variety of people here with different backgrounds, how does that intersect with people who haven't had English as a first language? Does that do you find that plays out a little differently in your students?
That can be a real challenge actually in that first year class. For the students who aren't native speakers of English, a lot of the examples we draw from are examples from English because it's an English language university and everyone knows some English, but that population of students can struggle, especially in that class, because their unconscious knowledge of English, they haven't been speaking English for as long. And so it's more effort for them to access that unconscious knowledge. On the other hand, they often have more conscious knowledge of English, having been taught it explicitly, often as older teens or as adults. They sometimes have more conscious awareness of how the language works than native speakers, people who learned it from infancy. So there can be some interesting conversations between those groups of students.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So going back to your classes, I understand that they may be very large, they may be a little smaller, but there are challenges with teaching larger classes. So generally, what would you say you're trying to do as an educator in these classes?
I had a kind of ironic realization a few years ago. Ironic for a teaching professor because I realized I can't teach anyone anything. That learning is a change in the learner, and I can't make that change happen. All I can do is try to set things up, try to create the conditions for the learner to make that change happen. So that's my underlying goal in just about everything, not just in the 2 or 3 hours that we spend together in the classroom, but in the things that I ask students to read or watch or practice or think about outside of class. My overall goal is, what can I ask or suggest that students do that will allow them to make that change in themselves? So a lot of trying to support students' learning actually involves clearing or minimizing obstacles to learning. So sometimes those obstacles are about the material itself. Sometimes, and because I've had a lot of experience teaching this subject, I can anticipate what the confusing points are going to be and how students might misunderstand things. So that's an obvious part of it, clearing away those conceptual obstacles. But just as often, the obstacles are things that aren't about linguistics, that aren't about the subject of the class. The obstacles are things like struggling to be organized and keep track of what's due when and what's coming up next. And so often I find that students' anxiety is a real obstacle to learning, that they want so badly to succeed in earning high marks that anxiety about what their mark is going to be makes it harder for them to learn because they're so worried about the grades. So on that front, there's a lot of practical things that I can do. Simple things like saying I'll drop your 2 lowest quiz marks, for example, or having flexible grading for midterms, that one can be worth more than the other, so that if you have a bad day or a bad week or something goes wrong somewhere along the way, it doesn't tank your whole semester. If I can reduce some of the anxiety about grades, then that can clear the way for some learning to happen. In the big first year class where a lot of those students are at university for the first time, it's September, they don't quite know how to work in university yet. And so I try to include supports like a weekly checklist of here's what to do this week, and to keep the routine similar from week to week so that it's clear to them what's going to be the best way to stay on track. It's not a due date that's 10 weeks away that you have to get yourself towards. This week you should do things 1, 2, and 3, and this week you're going to do things 4, 5, and 6. And by week 10, you've accomplished a whole lot already. And I think helping students minimize those obstacles can clear a path for them to concentrate on the learning and development that they need to accomplish for themselves.
So if I could gather from what you're saying, you'd like to create that really optimal learning environment for the students as a focus of what you're trying to do, as one focus of what you're trying to do. Is that fair?
Yeah, as much as possible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about peer mentoring, collaborative learning, because those are areas of your interests. Student engagement. Are those things that you also bring into your teaching in your classrooms?
Yeah, that's something I'm thinking about a lot in this big class. It's something that students can sometimes be uncomfortable with because I ask them to talk to each other a lot in class. Students have a tendency to spread out across the room to maximize the space between themselves and other students. And I say, no, you need to sit with somebody because I'm going to make you talk to each other. When you're first learning phonetics, you need to listen to speech sounds, and it's hard to hear the sounds you make yourself. It's hard to hear that objectively. So they need to sit together and talk to each other and listen carefully to each other. That's a simple example, but there's all kinds of other examples where for them to have a learning experience, it's going to be much more effective if they figure it out together than if I tell them how to do it. But figuring it out together means talking to someone you might not know very well. It means being a little bit vulnerable because you don't know the answer yet. And the person you're talking to maybe doesn't know the answer yet. You maybe don't want that person to think that you're dumb. It's hard, it's a little scary to talk to someone and to learn something together. So it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, how to make those optimal conditions to, again, reduce anxiety, reduce the risks of that, but still make it happen because I know that they're going to learn better if they talk to each other. So it's a negotiation with the students who would rather just sit by themselves and listen and take notes and go away and memorize, thinking I can do this myself, I can succeed on my own, for them to come to realize that they're going to learn better in collaboration with their classmates.
So expanding on that, what does a great teaching lesson, or maybe I should phrase it, what does a great learning lesson or session, how does that look to you?
I thought about what would be ideal. Ideally, the students would have had a good night's sleep and I would have had a good night's sleep. I'd be really well prepared and they'd be well prepared. They'd have done the reading and I'd have thought through all the topics that we were going to deal with that day. They'd be interested and energetic and our energy would feed each other. I could challenge them, ask some questions, create some exercises for them to do together that would challenge them, and that challenge allows them to develop as learners. They can ask some questions, ask for evidence, argue with me some. They can challenge me, which helps me learn and develop as well. Think about how to change the course for future years maybe, or how to respond that day or the next day in class. In ideal circumstances, the students and I can bring out the best in each other, and by challenging each other, we all learn collectively and collaboratively. And it's almost never ideal because we all have lots going on in our lives. And so I also spend a lot of time thinking about how to do the best we can in non-ideal real-life circumstances, knowing that students are tired and I'm busy and none of us had as much time as we wanted to prepare. How can we still do the best we can and still make a connection and learn from each other?
That word is interesting, connection, and it sounds like that's sort of describes what you're talking about when you're talking about a good learning. So engagement with each other, connecting with each other, conversing with each other, challenging each other.
Yeah. It's something I strive for.
Well, it sort of segues into a question that I have, and I think you've alluded to it, but what have been your challenges as an educator?
I'll be honest and say that big intro class can be challenging, partly just because of the sheer size of it. There are 600 students in that class, but it's not so much the size as it is the diversity of students in that class. So a whole lot of them have just arrived at university and they're excited but nervous and don't quite know how to be university students yet. So there's that population. As I mentioned, there's the population of students who aren't native speakers of English, so they have the particular challenge with the material. There's a sizable population of upper year, third and fourth year science students who are really concerned with getting high marks because they're going to med school. And then there's a smattering of students from all across levels and all faculties at the university who just think it's a fun elective. And so all those students have different goals. And it's a challenge for me to create conditions that are going to lead to learning for all those different students because they have different goals and they have different backgrounds and different challenges of their own. So that's the diversity of the student body is a challenge in that class. The other class that is a constant challenge to me is the second year psycholinguistics class. And that one's very different. That class is a specialized class. It's in the field that I trained in my PhD. And students find it hard. Year after year, this is a class that they find hard. And so every year I'm tinkering. I'm paying attention to what works and what doesn't work. And that class hasn't been the same any 2 years in a row because I'm always updating and hopefully improving to create the conditions that are going to help students learn and not have them perceive it as really hard. Things have to be a little hard for learning to happen, but for it not to be so hard that they give up and think it's not worth learning. So that's been a constant companion, that course. I'm always making changes every year to that one, and still haven't found the right formula, but I'm still working on it.
Right. It seems like that course keeps you honest, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of phrasing it. Yeah.
The title of this series is Soul on Fire, Narratives that Inspire. So I want to ask you what inspires and excites you about what you do? What is really satisfying about the work that you do?
I think what inspires me is the hope that the work that I do makes a difference to my students. So I feel a bit like I'm working on a small scale here. I make incremental changes to my courses. I create things that I ask students to do today or tomorrow, and I'm really only with them for a few weeks of each year. But I hope that those small things will take root and lead to those students making a difference out in the world. Maybe that starts small at first. Maybe it's them making a difference in helping the person sitting next to them in class figure out this tricky concept. And that's a small interaction, but that affects both those students. Maybe it means that in another few years, they're going to be working with a child with a language disorder and think back to what happened in class, and that affects that child's life or a client's life. they're the ones who are going to have the larger scale impact on the world. So the difference that I'm making in the world is here in connection with these students. And I'm trusting that those connections are going to have longer term, wider effects out in the world. I can't see it, but I trust that it's happening.
I'm going to go back to what we talked about right at the beginning when you talked about coming back to Hamilton and investing in your house, and therefore finding an investment in the community that you live in, and in turn in McMaster. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I guess I didn't know it at the time, but that investment in that little house turned out to be an investment of not just my life, but my whole family's life in this city. We don't live in the East End anymore. We moved to Westdale a few years ago. And so we have students living all around us. I walk and bike around the neighborhood a lot. And just about every time I'm out in the neighborhood, I see students say, "Hi, Dr. Anderson, hi. Oh, are these your kids?" And when we moved to this neighborhood, made a conscious decision to embrace that, to say, this is our community. The students and the university are our community, and we're part of this community too. That mindset that I have when I go to the bakery with my kids on Saturday morning plays its way through my whole work week as well, that this is my community. This isn't just my job that I do between these hours. This is how I've invested my life. And so it's really important for that investment to be worthwhile. Not that it's something that I see an immediate return on, but it's an investment in students, in the university itself, in the city of Hamilton, and in the world. And like I said earlier, I'm trusting that that investment has a return for the city and for the world.
Where do you see yourself going next?
I have a lot going on. Within linguistics, I've just spent a year doing a big redesign of that intro class. And so I have a lot of data that I've collected about how that went. We're going to use that data to continue to make improvements and make changes to the class so that it works well for all the different kinds of students in the class. So that's an ongoing project. And outside the department, I'm working now with some other faculty members in humanities to create a set of courses that aren't about a specific topic, but are about supporting students in developing as leaders. Because anyone who graduates with a university degree is among the most educated people in Canada. Those students are going to be leaders in the world. And so we see it as part of our responsibility to support them in developing their self-awareness and some of the skills that will make them effective leaders. So that's something that's new for me, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, it really sounds exciting, very interesting. And finally, Catherine, do you have any concluding messages for our listeners, any take-home messages, anything that you'd like to say before we finalize this interview?
I guess I'd like to say that we're in this together. Students and professors and everybody here at the university, we're in it together. None of us can do what we're meant to do without relying on everybody else. There's no point in me being a professor if the students aren't interested in learning. But I certainly can't do that without my colleagues and the staff. So it's sort of funny, people who want to be professors often are perceived as loners sitting in their office, researching in solitude, but it's a fundamentally collaborative kind of work.
I've been in conversation with Catherine Anderson, Assistant Professor, Department of Linguistics. Thank you very much for our conversation, Catherine.
Thank you, Anne.